selfie stick on. Here we go. All right, guys, Foucault. Welcome back to English 250, Introduction to Literary Studies, I think that it is. Let me put all my passwords on the ground, which I have written down on a piece of paper like an old man, so that the camera doesn't accidentally give you access to my entire digital life. So we are going over Foucault today, which is our next guy in the authors and art. What is it? Art and Authors unit. But we're joined by a special guest star today, which is your classmate, Mackenzie Winter. Look, there's Mackenzie on my coffee table. Oh, that's good. Say hi.
Hi.
Okay, so we're joined by Mackenzie Winter, who is a special guest star because Mackenzie wrote a paper about Foucault and Harry Potter, which is going to be one of my main examples today. So, right, let's get started. Let's try it out. Okay, so Foucault, here's the thing you got to understand about French people. French people, the main the in most in like a country like England, like the central writer is Shakespeare, who is he writes plays, and if you look at the central writers, the central I mean like most important writers in each country, they tend to be they're storytellers usually. France is unusual because their central writers are philosophers. The most important writer in France is a guy named Michel de Montaigne, who lived at the same time as Shakespeare did, and also a philosopher named Descartes. And those guys are really, and it makes France a weird place because the central writers from France are skeptics. Their whole thing is being like, you think you know something, but do you though? So like, if you know Descartes, he had this famous "I think, therefore I am," and that whole thing was based off of like, okay, so you think you're a person walking around in the world, but how do you know other people are real? And so he does this whole philosophy. It's a whole book study where he figures out what's real, and the only thing he says he knows for sure is that he's thinking. That's how he knows he exists. But he could be a brain in a tank, and all this could be a hallucination, like in the Matrix. Montaigne also is a guy who basically whatever you think is a sure thing, Montaigne's like, is it though? So a really simple example that Montaigne did was because remember, Montaigne's writing the same time Shakespeare did, so people are starting to like get on boats and float around and look at other parts of the world, like Native Americans, for example, and they would get these countries and they would be like, these guys are fucking barbarians. Look at them tearing each other. They eat people the South American natives eat human beings and shrink their heads and whatever, and they were just writing like, what fucking monsters, what barbarians. And Montaigne was like, yeah, have you seen the things we do to people in this country? Like we put people on the rack and torture them and tie them to horses and rip them apart. Do you really think you're so much better than them? Actually, they're better than you because they're honoring their victims when they eat them because they're imbibing a part of their spirit, they think. And you're just tearing people apart for fucking entertainment. So why do you think you're better than the goddamn quote unquote barbarians? Um, so that's Montaigne. I say this because you're going to see these guys are so central to the way France works that like you see the same thing in Baudrillard and Derrida, who are both French, and they have the same thing where Derrida's like, you think words connect to things, but do they? And then Baudrillard is like, you think you can tell the difference between art and reality, but can you? And so now we move on to Michel Foucault, who says, you think you know what an author is. It's an obvious one. I definitely know what an author is, but do you though? Mackenzie, do you have anything to add in this?
Um, Mostly just that, yeah, the whole question that he's putting forth is like, what what part of the writing is the author and what part is something totally different?
Yeah, yeah, it's a key. It's a key thing. Um, and by the way, Mackenzie, you should feel free to just leap in and interrupt me at any moment. I can't tell you how much I miss being interrupted. Because oh my God, these videos are just a whole thing. All right, so let's jump in with Foucault. Foucault, by the way, like Baudrillard, like Derrida, not the easiest guy to read. Also, making Foucault slightly more difficult is, and this is a thing that happens with a lot of this stuff, is that his examples are all from shit that we tend to not know. That's why we have a class like this, so we can kind of substitute it with our own examples. So let's swing over and take a look at what Foucault is doing. Here's Foucault. So Foucault says, assuming that we're dealing with an author, is everything he wrote and said, everything he left behind to be included in his work? This problem is both theoretical and practical. If we wish to publish the complete works of Nietzsche, for example, Nietzsche is a major philosopher that we may look at later, if we wish to publish the complete works of Nietzsche, for example, where do we draw the line? Certainly everything must be published, but can we agree on what everything means? So that's a classic French stuff, right? Is we agree everything should be published, but can we agree on what everything means? I don't know. I both love and hate the French. I have a I love it and it drives me crazy after a while. Because sometimes I'm just like, let's assume we can and move on. But they don't want to do that. All right. We will, of course, include everything that Nietzsche himself published, along with drafts of his works, plans for aphorisms, that's like sayings, marginal notations, and corrections. That's anything he wrote in the manuscript. But what if, in a notebook filled with aphorisms, that's like sayings, like think like fortune cookie kind of things. What if, in a notebook filled with aphorisms, we find a reference, a remainder of an appointment, an address, or a laundry bill? Should this be included in his works? Why not? These practical considerations are endless once we consider how a work can be extracted from the millions of traces left by an individual after his death, like all the things they wrote down. Plainly, we lack a theory to encompass the questions generated by a work and the empirical activity of those who naively undertake the publication of the complete works of an author often suffers from this absence of a framework. Meaning that, like, people will be like, I'm going to publish the complete works of Nietzsche, but then they're like, this doesn't count. This is a laundry list that we found among Nietzsche's papers, so that we're not putting that in there. But they're not really thinking about it. They're just kind of doing it like a knee-jerk reaction. They're just like, well, we don't need this. And then I'm going to finish the first paragraph here. So then he says, yet more questions arise. Can we say that the Arabian Nights and all these people we don't know, are these really works with a beginning, middle, and end? Such questions only begin to suggest the range of our difficulties, and if some have found it convenient to bypass the individuality of the writer or his status as an author to concentrate on his work, guys, that part right there, notice that's an interesting part for our class. If some have found it convenient to bypass the individuality of the writer or his status as an author to concentrate on his work, they have failed to appreciate the equally problematic nature of the word work and the unity it designates. That's Brooks. He says some people say ignore the author and just pay attention to the work. That's Brooks. And he says that's not going to work either, because just like you think you know what an author is, you don't. You have the same problem with a work, which is you think you know who an author is. The author is the guy that wrote the story. But similarly, you can't necessarily know where a story begins and ends necessarily. Okay, Mackenzie, do you want to jump in here with some examples that may make this make more sense to your classmates?
Yes, definitely. So the biggest example of is Harry Potter. Specifically with J.K. Rowling, she is super active in the community. She talks a lot on Twitter and in interviews and in book signings and things like that about what she was thinking during the writing process and about what she intended. And so those things that she says and writes, are they a part of the Harry Potter world because she is the author, or is it something totally different because it's not in the works? For example, when she said that Dumbledore was gay, right? A lot of people in the fandom were really confused by that because
where did she say that?
So she, I wrote it down.
I don't need these. I just mean like it was in an interview or something, right?
Yes, yeah, okay. It was in an interview. Yeah, it was in an interview when one of the books came out. I think when the last book came out.
Yeah.
That she imagines him as gay, and then there's this whole controversy of, well, then do we read the books and is he gay in the whole canon? Is that the thing that's happening? Or is that just something she said and we don't have to listen to it because she didn't really write it anywhere? Does she get the points for inclusion of LGBTQ characters because she says that she believed that? Or is it incredibly frustrating that she never addressed it in the text and never actually gave us that representation in the written works that she published?
Yeah. Oh my God, I realized I should have pointed the camera at you for that. I didn't realize that wasn't on screen. Figuring this out. Yeah, okay, that's an extremely good point. The thing that I think there's two things going here, which is number one, does the author get the credit for having gay characters in a book, if they're not actually in the book, but she just stated it later in an interview? The other thing is, like, where does authorship begin and end? Like, when you finish a book series, Does a living author get to add to it at any time? Of course, they're welcome to publish sequels, but do they get to add to it on Twitter? Do they get to add to it in interviews? Is everything they say like official as if it appeared in an actual book? And where do the books begin and end? Right? Do they are is Harry Potter just the physical books on the shelves and all the things in there, or does it also include her interviews and tweets? All right, I'm going to pause. I'm going to stop this, and we're going to pick it up at the next video.